7:01 actually, and welcome to tonight's Westwood Planning Board meeting. I'm Chris Paff. I'll be chairing tonight's meeting, and we'll take a roll call vote of attendance. Dave Atkins.
Aye, here.
Ellen Rawlings.
Here.
Tom McCusker.
Present.
Kate Wynn.
Here.
And I'm Chris Paff, as I said. The meeting is recorded by Westwood Media Center and broadcast live on local cable television, Comcast Channel 11 and Verizon Channel 42. Meetings are also live on Westwood Media Center's YouTube channel. If you're having any trouble logging into Zoom, please go to zoom.us and click on Join Meeting and enter the meeting ID number 896-611-25864. We'll begin the meeting with only board members and staff unmuted and on video. As the chair recognizes individuals to speak, we will unmute them. Board members may choose to mute themselves when they're not speaking in order to minimize background noise. For applications, the chair will first invite the applicant to address the board and give a presentation summarizing what is being requested. Board members receive the application materials prior to the meeting and will have reviewed them. Board members may ask questions during and following the presentation. Staff and outside experts will provide comments to the board. If the issues include a public hearing, the board will then proceed to the public comment portion of the public hearing and will restate the instructions. In this remote meeting format, residents and guests may participate in several ways. Attendees should raise their hand and wait to be unmuted and recognized to speak over the Zoom meeting application or from a telephone dial-up. We will be able to hear you but not see you. Additionally, comments may be submitted by email or regular mail prior to the meeting. When we come to that part of the meeting, I will remind everyone of the process. Following the public comment portion, the board will deliberate and make a decision continuing the hearing to a specific future date. All remote meetings require that votes be done by roll call. When a motion and a second has been made, the chair will ask if there's any further discussion before proceeding to a roll call vote and will then restate the results of the vote. Abby, do we have any changes to tonight's agenda?
There are no changes.
Okay, so first on the list, looks like 149 Birch Tree Drive, or Earth Material Movement, special permit, EIDR public hearing. Is the applicant here?
Yes, I'm bringing the applicant in now.
Okay.
Unmuted.
Hi.
There we go. Okay. All right. And we've got Paul. I'll start. I'm Molly Moran. I'm the architect for the project. And what I'd like to do is give a sort of a very low tech overview of the project. And then Paul Lindholm, who's also attending, will give, a little more technical information and can answer more technical questions. And then also with us is Barbara Fitzgerald, who is the homeowner, my client. And I think probably the contractor is listening in, Mark Garfield, and perhaps also the landscape designer, Ian Brown.
Just for the record, Molly, just for a second, my husband Paul sitting here with me too. So
okay.
I'm the applicant. So just
yeah. And who's with you?
my husband Paul.
Oh, okay, sorry. He
No
was
problem.
hiding in the corner
He was
there.
busy, but he just joined. Thank you.
Okay, what I'd like to do first, and I guess what I will do is I'll share my screen. I did upload some additional information today. Let's see if I can do that. We'll start with that. This is the copy of the consultant Beta Engineering's report. And what I did do is I did upload a new site plan that Paul Lindholm updated. I'm just going really quickly through this. He had noted that there was a silt fence on all sides of the property, but he actually now showed it graphically. Number 3, I had the zoning existing and proposed on the set of drawings for the building permit, but I uploaded a separate just chart of just that. Paul included the notes from number 4. I think the planning board determined number 5 wasn't necessary. Number 6, I know the connections are shown. Number 7 and 9 go together. We are going to be doing test pits hopefully this week, and after they're done, Paul will provide more detail about the top and bottom of the leaching units. And I did also include a construction detail for the proposed retaining wall, actually two details, a section and a plan, and the summary of suggested conditions from the planning board dealt with number 10, which is a direction for transporting through the town. Can you see the plan now? Is that okay? First of all, I want to acknowledge that, and again, I'm assuming that there are a lot of neighbors listening in as well, that this is a difficult site. It was a real challenging site. It's very narrow and it has a very steep pitch to the rear. And I really do think that what we have done, both architecturally and from an engineering perspective, has really improved a lot of the existing conditions. And I'll go through sort of generally the issues that were before the board for. The one is the large amount of fill we need to bring in. And the reason for that is the existing house, which you can see, where is it, back here, did not meet current zoning. It was too close to the street. So we had to move the house back. Oh, actually, no, here it is, right here. There's the line. We had to move the house back to conform to current zoning. And that meant that we had to fill in all of the existing foundation from the previous house. But we still minimized a lot of the fill because we did design it so that the rear of the building is at the existing grades. So we did not have to change the grades to the back of the property. The other thing we did was we did create swales on each side to direct any runoff from the neighboring properties. And probably the biggest change is we did add a retaining wall here at the top. And that is the subject of one of the issues before the board, which is the 5-foot raising in grade above existing. And the purpose for this is, in fact, to catch runoff from the street. So it will reduce the amount of runoff which goes down toward the back of the property. And we also have trench drains, gravel drains around all edges of the driveway and the walkways. And I think the final thing is the issue of construction. Things can happen. We have to acknowledge that there's a chance that, well, hopefully we're not going to be digging this week, but that you will have huge rainstorms. There will be issues that could come up. And we have erosion controls in place. As you can see, the red lines around the property. We also, again, I think I forgot to mention, we actually are adding infiltration units. We have 2 at this point in the back. There's 1 to this side of the rear, and there are 2 at the front to collect the runoff from the roof and from the driveway. But what I want to say is that I think we all are going to be extremely conscious during the construction process that all of the erosion controls are maintained. If there are any issues, we want to be able to be aware of them as quickly as possible. My office is in Dedham. I'm, minutes away. My intent is to be the contact person. If anyone has an issue during construction, either whoever gets contacted first, either the conservation department, the building department, or I will also have a job sign on the site somewhere where it's not going to be disturbed. So there'll be a phone number on site, and it's also on my drawings, which are on file with the town, and I believe are still available on the Viewpoint website. And I think that's it. I think the general overview is we've done our best to be sensitive. We think we have reduced some of the issues with the current property. We've designed a house which is literally just almost one story at the front. So it's in the same scale as the rest of the houses, which are adjacent, even though I know, design is not really what's being looked at today. And I think we've come up with a fairly sensitive solution to this difficult site. And then we're going to put Paul, I think if you have questions, Paul Lindholm is somewhere listening and available for questions.
Okay, thank you. So is that it? That's it for the presentation of this?
Yeah.
Paul's just here for questions, not more content?
I'll leave that open to Paul, wherever he is.
Okay. Abby, I know Beta looked at this. Is there a representative from Beta here? Or if not, are you able to give us a
Sure.
recap of their report?
There's no one here from Beta tonight, but Beta's memo, the applicant had summarized. We sent that at the end of last week when we received it. So the applicant has begun working on the revised plans. I saw this revised plan was uploaded this afternoon. I did review with Beta Group. They also requested the soils test pits at the location of the proposed chambers. So that should be done to confirm that. That should also be done with the conservation agent present. What's before you is really the earth material movement application. But because of the amount of disturbance, this project also requires an administrative stormwater review by the conservation agent. So my recommendation for you tonight is to require a revised set of plan to be revised to respond to Beta's comments. And then that's the plan that the conservation agent should review. And then the conservation agent would also should be contacted when you do the soil test so she can verify that work. So the conservation agent will really look further into the stormwater review.
Do we have a date when conservation is going to look at this?
No, because it doesn't have to go to the full commission. So it's the conservation agent that will review this at an administrative level. I did let the conservation agent know that you were reviewing it tonight and that I would comment after tonight's meeting with your updates.
Okay. All right, so that's it for the presentation. Board members, we'll open it up to questions for the applicant. Yes, Ellen.
So I have a couple of questions. First one is about the driveway. This is a much more detailed plan. This stormwater management plan has more detail to it, including the topography, than the original site plan that was submitted with the application. And I noticed this one is dated more recently. On the original plan, the driveway didn't include this extra little loop. So I'm assuming that you are intending to include that the little curved paved area that comes, loops back around towards the street. Yes, that is what you intend to build?
Yeah, I guess I'm a little confused. We submitted 2 site plans with the original application. The one was simply a zoning plan, and we also did submit a plan similar to this. It just did not have the temporary entrance and the perimeter noted, and probably some additional notes.
Okay, but I just want to understand what that is what the driveway will look
Yes,
like.
and this is what was submitted to conservation as well.
Okay. So my other questions are kind of about stormwater as well, because I'm very sensitive to that. I live downslope from people, so I understand the concerns about any changes to a lot potentially causing a change in the water flow. I noticed on one of the plans you submitted, I think it was the zoning plan, that the area to the left of the house, if you're standing on Birch Tree, and along the back, there's a note about a drain easement. Is that, yes. I don't see it on this plan, but I did see it noted on the other
It's
site.
right here,
Yeah. Is that
the gray line.
is that where you're planning to put some swale? Is that?
No, that's not, that, I believe, it's Paul's got his hand raised. That's a town easement to an existing manhole and off-site.
Okay. So that's been there forever and has
Right.
nothing to do with the drainage that you're planning to
No.
put in. Okay. I'm trying to think. I think that was the bulk of my questions. You know, I appreciate the regrading in the front and that retaining wall. I think will do a lot to keep water from heading towards the back. And my other question was, will the drainage that you're including address the driveway? And I think you did mention that it would be for roof runoff and the driveway, because you
Right,
know.
and we also have these gravel trenches.
Okay, because I know, I'm sure that a lot of the concern is from the grade in the back, which I know you're not touching, but it's still a steep slope. And while
Right.
you are still going to be well under the 50% allowed impervious surface, you are more than doubling the current impervious surface. So I understand the concerns from folks in that neighborhood about whether or not this is going to make things worse. But you know, and that is again more under the purview of conservation. But I just wanted to get some clarification on some of those. So I appreciate you answering my
Yeah,
question.
I just want to be sure I'm doing this right, because I see Paul up there with his hand raised. I want to be sure I'm giving you the correct answers too.
If you'd like, we could let Paul, if he has additional comments to the questions, he's happy to hear from him.
Right.
I'm not able to see, I don't have a video on Paul, so.
I just have his hand raised here at the top.
I'm not, I think with the screen sharing, I might not be seeing everything. But is Paul there? Does he have
No.
something you'd like to say?
There we go.
You guys see me now?
Yep.
Can I do a share screen so I can control the site plan?
Mhm.
Yes, you should be able to.
Does she have to relinquish?
Yeah,
Sure.
Molly may need to.
I did, yeah.
Talk to you first, okay.
You guys seeing it?
Mhm.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right, Abby's saying yes. So Abby said some things when she noted, so that this plan is in response to Beta's comments and recommendations. The only real thing, the biggest thing is we didn't have time to do test pits. But Beta said, you know, had some comments and they were all good. And I think Ellen is picking up on the same things. This is a, steep site. It goes from the front to the back. The front is fairly flat, but, there is an issue, and some of the neighbors said, we've had other experiences of construction going on when you're downhill, and they're not the first ones, that you are sensitive to erosion that can come onto your property. And that makes all the sense in the world. Molly said, and partly in response to Beta, some comments that made sense. We added a lot of information. So I put Molly and her phone number right on here. So, and as Molly said, she's going to display the phone number out there. She's not going to go away. And I think the client is going to be sensitive to this as well. So if there, because things can happen, I've been involved in a lot of stormwater pollution prevention plans, and one of the starting points is always, who's going to be on call in case something happens. And, because soil erosion, sedimentation control is a, kind of a responsibility that you got to take care of things, be ready before it happens. But when the storm comes, that's why you're ready. And this is, what we're trying to do. Beta said, add some detail. So we kind of doubled it up. It's not just a water line around the edge. And, there needs to be some, little offsets between the property lines in the minimum. But whenever there's a downhill grade like this, you got to do things like put in check dams whenever they're available, whenever they're, you need to. I mean, we're not, I think everybody's seen the little rivulets going down the hill, and it turns into a big one, So, these things have been highlighted. there is one thing, I got the hours of operation wrong. So that needs to be edited. So on this particular plan, I think we got it to the point where besides the allowable hours, which we got wrong, but so that needs to be fixed. It's 12 to 7 on Sundays at the minimum. And then, and that would be it. And after the test pits were done, and we've also sent this to Karen for the Conservation Commission, and we've been in touch with her. And you know, we started the whole thing out with, you know, to do the stormwater design, the leaching is done, the whole collection of the driveway, the whole collection of the house, you know, and obviously before there was none for either under the existing condition. And to put, you know, do that in accordance with an administrative review that Karen already did. We started it out that way. So it's better, as Molly said, it's better than existing conditions. But the one that we really needed to highlight was the soil erosion sedimentation control because of the steepness of the grades. And, you know, whenever anything is left bare, it's got to be controlled during the construction process. Does that help out?
I think so. I won't speak for everyone. Other planning board members with questions for the applicant? Okay, seeing no questions relative to the earth material movement or the stormwater, which has been a topic of conversation. I just, Mr. Lindholm, I just wanted to reiterate, you said that currently the house that exists has no controls whatsoever for stormwater management?
In terms of gutters, just go on the ground, the driveway, same thing, it just flows to the back. And so there's no existing, you know, stormwater. And by the way, that drainage easement, I think Ellen was looking at that, and we're not tying into any of it. You know, it's all this easement along the side. It is a pipeline that runs down through there. The grading on the sides, Molly said this, I mean, we're just trying not to go to the neighbors. We really don't want to change any grades in the back and on the sides, but this is just minimally so we don't direct any drainage to a neighbor where it's not going. So we're just trying to make sure it's not so much a swale as don't push it to the neighbors is the indication. But that's but that's the drainage easement, and we're not going to do anything to impact that.
All right. All right, sorry, my video seems to stop every now and then, so I have to stop and start it again. Okay, I have to go back to a different page just to look at planning board members before I put it out to public comment. Okay, we're all set. Abby, as we have a shared screen, sorry, it's difficult. Does anyone have any, I see one hand raised, and that's Mr. Lindholm. Any, we put it out for public comment period. I see no hands raised by attendees. Is that correct? Oh, I see a Mr. Thomas Philbin. Hello, sir. Mr. Philbin, are you there? It appears as he's still muted, according to what I'm looking at.
Okay, I'm unmuted now. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Thank
Oh,
you.
great. This is Tom and Avery Philbin. We live at 107, which abuts on one corner, 149. And let me just say, since I wrote my letter, I think this revised plan addresses a lot of the questions we had about water and silt flowing. So pleased in that regard, but I think we had a couple questions and just a couple observations. First, it's obviously not a theoretical concern, as I indicated in my letter. When the property at 161 was added on to and some landscaping changes, before the vegetation had taken hold, there was a rainstorm and a significant amount of silt and water invaded the property at 95. They had a flooded basement, actually. And 129, which is right next to us, that was pretty much a tear down. The existing house, the exterior first floor walls were left and the foundation. But quite a bit of fill was brought in. I think they raised the backyard about 5 feet, most of it. And as soon as it rained, we had a large amount of silt and water. We had a flooded basement. We lost a lot of plants. We have a professionally landscaped lot. And after it was done, we had to remediate this a bit with some controls on our own property, including some barriers by our fence. So I'm just raising this because our concerns are not theoretical. It's happened to the left of this property. It's happened to the right of the property. And I think from the high point to the low point of Birch Tree Drive is probably at least 30 feet in elevation. So it's pretty significant. But looking at this plan, obviously there's a lot of additional stuff in here. We had one question. The barrier that's going to be around the complete perimeter, is any part of that going to remain after the landscaping is completed, or is that only there until vegetation takes hold?
Uh,
Am I answering that?
Whichever of you feels most confident, and the answer is fine with us.
The actual silt fence is not going to stay because that's not very pretty, frankly. But the client does have a professional landscape designer, and I'm sure they're going to take into consideration because also they're going to be concerned about plant materials surviving. And we will just simply make sure that they, in their designs, have provided for sort of ongoing control, particularly at the lower part of the property.
Thank you for that. This is Avery Philbin talking. So I know Ian is very familiar with the landscape in that abuts the property in question that we're talking about. And we actually called Ian Brown to come out and assess some of the damage that was done from when 129 was built and their lack of landscaping. So is it possible to also hear from Ian about this too? I mean, when Ian met with me and talking about how water runs through this specific neighborhood, basically it was, well, you really can't do anything about water. So I think that's the reason why we're very concerned about this. It's a beautiful house. We're a very close neighborhood, and we just want to make sure that everything is going to be okay.
I just have one really quick comment. There are two different issues. One is the landscaping issue and one is the engineering. It's the engineering that's going to take care of the water issue. I mean, I'm sure his planting, of course, obviously will secure any runoff of materials, but it's not going to solve the runoff problem. I mean, I think that's maybe what he meant in his statement to you. It really is the engineering of the site that's going to control that.
Am I still on?
Yeah.
Yes.
You hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. So I didn't know. So in terms of the question about soil erosion sedimentation control, I mean, if it needs a highlight, it ought to be highlighted on the plan, and we can definitely do that when we give this, final revision, or it can certainly be a condition. But soil erosion sedimentation controls need to be in place and until the site is stable. So that's a normal way to for a board, commission, whatever. And in this case, I believe we've already talked about having Karen, who's, she's pretty familiar with the Conservation Commission and her responsibilities for them, to be aware of, how to handle stormwater, for soil erosion sedimentation controls and when you release it. In fact, we've got at least one note in there already that says she needs to approve this before the construction really gets going. So it's a checkpoint at the beginning, and it should be a checkpoint at the end. in terms of a landscape contractor, he has to still work within the confines of that and make sure that he respects the soil erosion sedimentation control to, like, all the plantings are stable. So it's, you know, he needs to be subject to those conditions as well. Does that make
Okay,
sense?
Yeah. I just want to remind everyone here, tonight's meeting is for the purpose of earth material movement. We are sensitive to the abutters and their issues with regard to stormwater management, but it really does fall outside the purview of this board, the stormwater management. That is an issue for conservation and it's administrative review, given the size of this particular project. So I know Mr. and Mrs. Philbin sent a letter in, and again, we are sensitive to allowing neighbors their opportunity to voice their concerns about a project. But again, this board's authority extends only as far as the earth material movement. So I'm happy to allow the applicant to respond to some concerns, but I don't want this discussion to get too far off topic for this board. The board has had opportunity to ask the applicant of earth material movement questions. And I believe we had one board member who asked some questions, and other board members, I'll give them another opportunity if they do have any other questions or any questions at all. I do see another hand raised by a member of the public, so I will call on Maggie Collins.
This is Maggie Collins of 95 Birch Street. I just wanted to echo what Tom and Avery Philbin stated, and they asked the exact question that I was going to ask, so I'm not going to harp on that since you just mentioned it's not necessarily the focus of this call, but did want to support their concerns about the runoff. And my question was just to what the chair was just mentioning, which is that the conservation board is responsible for that additional review. Is there a way to submit a letter to them to make sure that concerns are noted in their review, or is there not a public comment?
Abby, are you able to answer that?
There's no formal public hearing process with the conservation agent's review, but I let her know that we did receive the 2 letters on this and the report from Beta Group, and I let her know that I would follow up tonight since this is an administrative review by the conservation agent. So I can definitely let her know you know, Beta's recommendation, and that's what she was looking for too, is Beta Group is our on-call town engineering service. And I will provide her with the 2 letters received and Beta's comments. And Beta's comments were really that the water is, you know, with the requested plan changes and what the work that they've shown, the grading is directed away from the abutters. And then with the new house, the new driveway, that new runoff is being captured by the new plan captures it into the runoff into the chamber system. So our engineering service believes the water is, you know, sufficiently being captured here with this revised plan that I will, after tonight, forward also to the conservation agent, or the final revised plan should go to the planning board, to Beta Group, and the conservation agent.
Thank you.
Thank you, Abby. I'll keep it open for public comment for a couple more seconds, see if there's anyone additional.
Chris, if I may, Mr. Chairman.
Absolutely, sure.
I appreciate the public comment. I appreciate the time that everybody has put into this project. This is our 4th home in Westwood. We're very sensitive to the properties in Westwood. We've lived above grade, below grade, and all of that. We're very sensitive. You know, the commentary, additional commentary that we received from abutters who, you know, I think some of the abutters may be new to the neighborhood is, you know, we've taken great care to make this an appropriate home for this particular neighborhood, and a tremendous amount of effort in short order. Our team actually responded the town's engineering report, which they received on Friday, to actually get this in shape so that we can proceed with what we think will be an incredible improvement. We have no interest in damaging anybody's property or having any runoff. And I think we have the appropriate team to handle that. And that's what civil engineers do. And so that's where we are today. And we are not insensitive, but we also would really appreciate the opportunity to move forward and change this property for the better in the neighborhood. So thank you. Thank you, everybody, for taking the time.
Thank you. Okay. Sorry, I just keep having to go back and forth. Yes.
I do
Kate.
have, thank you, Chris. Mr. Chair, I do have one question since it was just kind of brought up. I'm just curious, Ms. Fitzgerald, this is your fourth property in Westwood. Are these owner occupied properties?
It's our fourth home, single family that we have lived in, will live in.
Will live in.
Three
Okay, thank you.
previous homes around town for 30
you.
years. So
Thank you.
Okay. Allow a few more seconds for someone to possibly raise their hand in the attendees section for public comment. All right, seeing no activity there.
Chris,
Abby,
I'll just,
we can-
I just
oh,
had a-
sorry, Dave.
that's all right. No, I didn't have any questions, but I just wanted to, and since we talked about kind of the role of the planning board and all here, that I didn't want to I don't want to underemphasize the value of this. Really, I really appreciate that the homeowner and the engineer and the neighbors all came to this public discussion of these issues, because I think that's how these things are best done. Here we have the plan is being discussed in public, and yes, after this, it goes to the conservation agent, but it's all part of the process, and I really appreciate everyone participating in this way, instead of, just send a representative or something, but here you've got the homeowner, you've got listening to everything. I think that's all part of what we're trying to do here. Even if we as a board don't vote something up or down, based on the specific details of the stormwater stuff, it's important to air these issues and to provide an example of how things should be done.
Thanks, Dave. Okay, Abby, I think we have some waivers requested, right?
Right.
I can't get to anything with the screen sharing up here. I
Okay.
can't see any of my. It's kind of a
Yeah,
flaw in the system a little bit, I think.
I'll make a motion. I'll introduce that. So there are 3 waivers requested. There are 3 waivers that are needed, one for traffic study, for a presentation model, and for an exterior lighting plan. So I would move that we grant those waivers because they are not needed for this earth material movement application for a single family home.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion on the waivers? Yes,
Sorry.
Ellen. Sorry.
That made me think of one other question that I had seen in some of the letters from the abutters. The question about asking for the waiver on the lighting plan. The question was, does that mean it's safe to assume that you're not planning any kind of floodlights? It's just standard residential lighting. That was a question that I forgot to mention earlier.
Yeah, absolutely. There's just a small deck at the back, and they'll just be very low key lighting.
Okay. Sorry, didn't mean to interrupt the motion, but that when you got to that, it reminded me that I wanted to ask about that. Thank you.
That's part of the further discussion, so that's fine. Okay, we have a motion and a second for the waiver request. So we'll do a roll call vote. Kate,
Aye.
Tom,
Aye.
Ellen,
Aye.
Dave,
Aye.
and I vote aye as well. So we can move on to the conditions. Abby, can you list and enumerate the conditions?
Sure. Actually, Paul, are you able to stop sharing your screen?
That would be helpful.
Can stop. Yeah, I can do that.
Thanks.
Thank you.
So in the planning board's packet, that it also sent to the applicant, there was a list of 10 suggested conditions of approval. So the first one was to submit a further revised plan. It looks like the applicant's working on it, but it should address the items listed in Beta's memo to include the silt fence for the erosion controls, the construction entrance, the details on the proposed drainage chambers, and the retaining wall detail. Number 2 is performing the soils test where those chambers are. And that should also be done with the conservation agent present. Number 3 is for the applicant to submit a certification that the fill doesn't contain any hazardous material. This could usually be obtained from the company providing the fill, or there could be testing done. So that should be submitted to the office of the planning board prior to bringing in any fill and prior to issuance of a building permit. Number 4, that the pavement on Birch Tree Drive should be protected during construction. Condition 5 is related to the town's construction hours. And I see that you're working on putting them on the plan, which is 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. Monday through Saturday, and then noon to 7 p.m. on Sundays. So we usually regulate the truck routes. I realize this is, Birch Tree is right off of High Street, so really it should just be the most direct route right off of High Street, right on Barlow, and right to Birch Tree. Number 7 is the applicant is responsible for obtaining approvals from any other board or committee or agency. So after this, the next step would be continuing with the conservation agent. Condition 8 is related to the applicant is responsible for repairing any damage to the streets that may be caused during construction, but first with town approval. Number 9 is keep a copy of this decision on site at all times, and that this approval is good for, must commence within 2 years or it expires. And that's all the conditions.
Okay, thank you for reading those. It occurred to me that in this discussion, it's never been stated. If Mr. Lindum or Ms. Moran could tell us how much fill is needed and coming in, and how many truckloads approximately are going to be needed. Do you have that information?
We're estimating about 800 cubic yards, and how that gets trucked in is, divided by 20 or something, if plus or minus, depending on the trucks that are used. But it is a chunk, 800 divided by 20 is what?
40?
Yeah,
40.
it's a lot, so that, that's, as
I
Molly
just
said,
wanted to make sure that it was.
that would be a max. It's hard for me to believe it would be 40, but
That's fine. I just wanted.
I'm just trying to be conservative.
Got it. Understand. Okay, so we've had a reading of the conditions, and I think we are ready to entertain a motion. If anyone.
I move that we approve the earth material movement permit with the conditions that were just discussed.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All right, seeing none, we'll do a roll call vote. Ellen?
Aye.
Tom? Dave?
Aye.
Kate?
Aye.
And I vote aye as well. Okay. I didn't miss any hands, did I, before we close this? I didn't see any further hands in public comment, so. The motion has been passed and we're ready to close the public hearing, Abby, or anything else you need from us? Okay, entertain a motion to close the public hearing.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? All right, roll call vote to close the hearing. Tom?
Aye.
Kate?
Aye.
Dave?
Aye.
Ellen?
Aye.
I vote aye as well. All right, thank you very much for your time. Best of luck on your project.
Thank you, everybody, very much for hearing us.
Thank you.
Thank you to everyone for coming out tonight.
Thank you.
Aye.
Yeah. Good night.
Good night.
Thank you.
Okay, Abby, that is the last of our public hearings for the evening on the agenda.
Right.
Yeah.
So we'll move on to discussion regarding our zoning amendments. How do you want to proceed?
So for tonight, we did post a meeting and invited the housing partnership to attend as well. I see one member of the housing partnership, Lou Rizzoli, is here. So I'm just bringing him in. I see one member, Eric from the housing, WAHA, Westwood Affordable Housing Associates, is here as well. Unfortunately, that meeting posting, that was not posted as a separate meeting. So we'll keep Eric as an attendee, and then we'll open it up to public comments. You do have in your packet a draft scoring card from the Housing Partnership and the Housing Authority, or WAHA, Westwood Affordable Housing Associates. They both sent two recommendations. They are a little bit different. So you can go through those. If you recall at your August meeting, it came up as a discussion item that first you were trying to focus on where you would like to allow this new multifamily housing zoning, where it's going to be located, and the idea of creating an evaluation scorecard for you to use as you're considering which properties and which areas that you would like to rezone. So we did staff in September and through October, through last week, staff attended 2 housing partnership meetings and actually 3 housing partnership meetings and met with the Westwood Affordable Housing Associates last week to do a presentation and inform each group on this new law. It's referred to as the MBTA Communities new state law about requiring the multifamily housing by right within a half mile of train stations. So we met with those groups, summarized the law, and then staff has begun working on a draft scoring sheet that we presented to both groups. And then both groups together went through the criteria, made some revisions, and then each made their own changes and then recommended to you 2 drafts that you had in your packet. So tonight, my recommendation to you tonight is for you to review that since it's been a couple of meetings since you've had time on your agenda to kind of go through this in detail. So my recommendation for you tonight is to think about how you want to proceed with this. You know, I think it was a good idea creating an evaluation scoring card, that I really see this for you to use, thinking about how to meet the law and which properties you would like to select to ultimately bring forward to a recommendation for annual town meeting in the spring. So I think you should be really using this to outline, you know, the purposes that you would like to meet. And then this, you know, once you review this, you can review in detail, make any changes that you wish as a group. You can decide, you know, whatever final version, either tonight or at your next meeting. And then once you have that decided, then you can use it to go through certain parcels and certain properties and kind of rule some out and then decide which ones you would like to bring forward. So I think this is a good tool that you should be looking at this criteria as, you know, a fair way to evaluate properties and help you decide what you wish to bring forward. If board members have any questions before we begin or any ideas, and then I thought we could pull it up. I can share it to the screen and we can walk through it.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I don't see any real legal implication with an interior scorecard, so I am going to allow you to do your work on this, and I've got some other matters I've got to attend to tonight.
Okay. Thank
All
you.
right, thank you.
Okay. Yes, Ellen.
Sorry, I was just saying goodnight to.
Oh, sorry. Everyone's waving. Okay.
Chris,
All right.
if
Yes,
Eric, since Eric Alden is here, I didn't, if he wants to speak from the housing, if he wants, shouldn't we recognize him too, or?
Well, we can't bring him in as a panelist because of the problem that we had with the notice. So we are going to allow him to speak as a resident, but we don't want to run afoul of any open meeting law situation. So we want to, he will have opportunity to speak. We just want to make sure that we don't make any missteps along the way. That was the reason for keeping him as a panelist or as a attendee. So I think we five need to start a discussion about this scorecard. And if you remember, Abby and Nora created the first iteration, and then it went to the Housing Partnership meeting where Kate and I attended. And Housing Partnership came up with a few changes to the original draft. And they then had a subsequent meeting where they could feel free to make additional changes, and they chose not to. West Housing Authority, WAHA, took the opportunity last week, I believe, right, Abby, when they met, to make alterations where they did make changes in not only some of the content, but some of the numeric value that each thing was to be given, and that reflects their level of import for each item. So it doesn't necessarily have to reflect ours. We have to consider a lot of things that WAHA may not consider, as well as Housing Partnership. So I believe these two were presented to us so that we could use it as a launching point to then create our own. It may be a mix of the two. It may look like neither of them, or it may look like just one of them. So I think we need to have a discussion about our concerns going forward about the values we place on certain aspects of each property. And so that we can come up with choosing the right location for this particular bylaw. So I think we have a lot of things to kind of discuss, and it may not take a long time. I see my video just froze up again, sorry. But I think we all need to be on the same page as to how we're going to implement this tool. So that's why I bring up a little bit of that history and where we are right now. So I would open it up to board members to start a discussion of how to use this tool or how to tweak it. Yes, Kate.
Thanks. I just think this is such a terrific starting point. So I want to start, just say that first. I do think it's important that we understand this scorecard. It makes it look a little bit more like a science than an art. And so I just want to be really clear from the beginning. These are in my opinion, these are suggestions. It may be that that at the end of the day, the highest numbered doesn't necessarily determine the site, because I do think there's a little bit more art than just these numbers. So that's number one I wanted to say. But number two, when we look at these two lists, I did just want to highlight that for me, giving them a numeric order, I think maybe alphabetical somehow versus numeric just takes away some of the suggestion about what our highest priority is, because all of these aspects are so important. So criteria A versus criteria 1 might be really helpful. And then the other thing to just mention as we're starting is that we don't as yet understand if we have a way to force affordability into this anywhere for housing. So it's not listed on the scorecard, but it is. So I don't want to get confused about what we're talking about. We're not talking about building affordable units at this point. We're talking about building just what the state has asked for.
Well,
and that's go ahead.
Sorry, I was to say, I think Abby has indicated to us that she believes that going forward with an affordability component may be possible, but we do have to understand that we may have to pivot and do a 180 on that at any moment's notice once we eventually get state guidance. Yeah. So we can feel free to go down any road we want, but We want to take as much of the information as possible to make sure we don't have to backtrack or turn around. It's 2 months from now, 6 months from now, whenever the state decides to give us some more guidance.
Right.
Any thoughts from anyone who's had opportunity to look at either or both of these scorecards? I did highlight some of the differences if we wanted to go through between WAHA and housing partnership. If we wanted to use that as a starting point, we could talk about that. Again, oh, Abby's sharing now, okay. For example, residential developability was the housing partnerships and I believe it was criteria number 1 or the first one listed when Abby and Nora started it. Is that right, Abby? It was the first
Right.
subject?
What's on the screen now is the housing partnerships recommendation. If you want to go through those, and then we can review what the changes were in WAHA's. But the way the draft, the way the draft was first written, I did a first draft and I just put out ideas. They weren't prioritized in any order. It was just taken from the law, trying to meet the purpose of what was stated in the state law. So I developed, the first draft criteria was based on the law and wasn't in any particular order.
So why don't we go through this first one and get initial thoughts from board members. Number 1A, again, numbers or alphabet, it doesn't really matter, just for purposes of our discussion. I'll just read it as it appears. 1A, availability of land. 5 points if it's currently for sale, -10 if it's slated for another use. Should we go through all of them, then we talk about the subject? Maybe we'll do that.
And Chris, if I just add, and one of the changes that WAHA recommended was in this first one, they changed the points from -10 to be +15 and added the words if currently fully or recently developed. So essentially they thought.
Abby, they say -15.
Oh, -15. Okay.
It might get difficult to go through each one of these and without them being side by side. I don't know if people are looking at, there's just a lot. I mean, we're talking about the minutia of this draft. And I think right now we should talk about maybe a high level, just looking at these and does this pass our eye test? Are these the things we see as being important for this bylaw to identify? I don't know. I think we need some discussion points, and I'm not sure how to facilitate that other than just if you've had an opportunity to read it, tell me your thoughts on the overall draft, the document, or line item by line item. I think it's a tough thing to get into, but
I had some thoughts, like if we could walk through it and maybe it will naturally merge into something, like if we just sort of take this first thing here and discuss that, and then as we get to the other one, are there things that can be merged, or should they be an additional criteria? And so like on this, is what we're talking about here, residential developability, is that the potential for actually building a multifamily housing, right? Like this is, so when you look at the parcel, how likely is it that if we zoned it by right, that something would actually happen?
yeah,
Right.
how easy is it for a developer to go through all the steps needed to build? That's where these A through E are talking about.
Feasibility or something, or kind of the feasibility.
Right.
Or the,
So you see there's negatives for things that make it, or are obstacles for a developer, and positive for.
So that first one, +5, is like, yeah, if there was a place where there was currently a sign out there for sale for a long time, or whatever, then that's increases it. And if it's known that the property was recently purchased, that's the -10, or like somebody's already got a plan for it. So it's very unlikely that it's going to become available in the future.
Right.
Yes, that's exactly right. That
That's-
was the thought. And WAHA's recommendation was to be changed to -10 to -15. An example is we, there's a couple, like we know, there's a couple of developments that are already, forthcoming, are already in the pipeline. So if something's already being permitted or going to be submitted soon, if you were to choose that location, it's not likely that that would be developed for housing. So that 1A was negative points there. And 1B gave more points if there were larger properties in one ownership, and less points for smaller properties, and the negative points for very small properties, because that's less likely that new multifamily housing that met the law would not likely happen, or it would take a significant financial and time investment. So that would be very gradual changes, because someone would have to buy up multiple properties over years prior to even coming forward with any development proposals.
The third one, 1C, as it's shown here, Kate and I were both of the opinion, we requested a change be made, that since the state indicated 15 units per acre as the base measure, that the units be broken up into divisible by 15, essentially, or an easier divisible by 15. So that was suggested by Kate and I at the very first meeting. We just thought it was a little easier to understand if we were measuring it against the state's requirement. Now, 1D, I believe that's the one that WAHA actually eliminated entirely, correct?
Right. Right.
They didn't
WAHA,
see the need
yeah.
for discussion of infrastructure improvements. But the Housing Partnership did, and they kept the point system as the same one that Nora and Abby had initially suggested. So you can read through, again, obstacles or easy path for a developer. That's the intention of this. And maybe, if any board members have any other things to add to this list or don't see a reason for something. For example, on the very first one, I think it said access to Wi-Fi, and I made the suggestion that that really isn't a restriction by a developer, so I thought it should be removed just for clarity, I guess, or was not to muddy the waters of discussion. And the last one, again, I think speaks for itself with regard to ease of development.
I do have a question, Abby, for 1D, those infrastructure improvements, are those costs typically picked up by the builder, or does the town incur any of those costs?
So these would all be costs of the developer. So it would be private development. But the idea was, if you're looking to evaluate sites, if you're looking to find a location that would, be attractive to a housing, to produce more housing, it's more likely that a developer will be interested in areas that already have utility access, that already have good, road access, because it's less work for them to do. So that was the idea. The idea is, this is all, it'd all be private, fine, the developer would be responsible for this, but it's more, if the goal is to produce more multifamily housing, a location that already has utilities is more likely to be developed than if someone would have to also invest in road improvements and sidewalk improvements. So that's why the suggestion was for negative points if there's a substantial amount of infrastructure work that also has to be done.
Great, thanks. I think you answered that for me once before, and it didn't stick, so thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other comments about this first criteria subject? residential developability? If not, we can move on to the second one. And so we're talking about transit-oriented or village center. Mixed use would be something that would be promoted here. The very first one, village center development. So housing close to our already existing businesses. Essentially, we have 3 locations. There's High Street, Islington, and University Station, and 2 of which would satisfy the half-mile away from train station and or possibly bus station. We still don't know if that's going to suit the needs. But so the idea here was it would be a positive if it were near all of these things, to allow for mixed use, for this, anyone living in this to be close to commercial, our commercial, through one of our 3 commercial hubs.
Right, and the idea for 2A was both groups, 2A and 2B. Waha also kept the points the same, which encouraged more points if you chose a location that, if it was over the existing businesses, that if it allowed for upper story housing, that was, awarded more points than if it was infill housing, which is essentially housing that is near or in between and adjacent to other existing housing units.
And Waha did change 2C, their points from +10 to up to +15 and +5 up to +10. So there's one distinction between the 2 groups, is they put a greater emphasis on the physical connections.
And so these would be, like this would be in addition to these things. Like what I'm thinking is just that if you have multifamily by right, then, it isn't going to be that they would go for upper story because they can just do the multifamily by right, but it might be next door to mixed use development. I mean, I'm just thinking that it's, as a practical matter, if you have the base zoning that allows by right multifamily, doesn't that sort of cancel out? Like for that property, it's going to be something by right, and then maybe next door there's a special permit for mixed use development or something.
Well, this is for us to use to identify the best property in town, and this would be giving it 10 and 5 points if that property happened to be here. So it's for us to identify where the by right multifamily is. And if it is right next to or close by to a mixed use, then it gets a higher value with regard to that one criteria. I'm not
Yeah, I
sure,
think that's, like if you were looking at a place that's out in the middle of a totally residential area, that's not going to get any points. But if you're looking at some place that's close to other things, other more flexible development, then it's going to get more points here because it could complement that.
And then it may rise to the higher level of property that we want to consider for this bylaw. I feel bad, Ellen, you are up here on a second page, so I can't see you if you're raising your hand. So please just chime in if you have something you'd like to say, because I can't see you raise your hand.
Oh, no, I'll chime in if I have something to add. Thank you, though.
All right, sure. If I missed you, I apologize.
No worries.
Okay, we'll move on to number 3 criteria as it appears here, and that promotes family supportive housing. As that was 3 by Abby and Nora, and the Housing Partnership kept it there. And I'm trying to see where Waha put it. Or did they change?
Waha changed the number of points in the first one, access to schools and playgrounds. They gave more points. They gave 20 points if within walking distance to school, and they increased 5 to 15 points if within walking distance to a playground. And their reasoning was they felt that was, to meet the goal of the law, to provide family supportive housing. People look for housing that's, a place where you want children to live, and how, I think they were thinking about the safety of walking, how walkable it is. So that's what they were looking at, is if it's in a place where people, the children could easily walk to a school playground, with more points given to the proximity to a school.
It should also be noted that Waha rearranged the criteria, and instead of being criteria 3, as Housing Partner kept it from Nora and Abby, they moved it up to criteria 1. So it appears to be their most important, appears. I won't speak for them necessarily, but by making that change, I think to the top of the list, it indicates that. And they did rename residential desirability to proximity to other residential properties. Yeah, so they put it down at the bottom, and that included 10 points for within an existing neighborhood and 15 if adjacent to a single family neighborhood. One of the concerns I had about this was, and this is the same regardless of which one we're looking at, access to schools and playgrounds. And that is the distance that we're talking about. We're talking about a half a mile distance away from a train station to be considered here. So if you really wanted something in Islington to be considered, or you thought it met all of those things, and I think, as Kate put it, the art, if it just feels right to you, you may say, well, the Hanlon School is walkable because there are sidewalks all the way to Hanlon School. So it's a safe route, even though you might not have a second grader walk that far down Washington and then down Gay. So I think this one, while I understand the intent, I think each of us may have 5 different understandings of what is walking distance to a school. And I could walk to the Sheehan School, and I live over by Downey. I can walk across Route 1 by a sidewalk. There's just a number of different ways we can interpret this. And so I'm a little concerned that Waha is designating 20 points if it's a walking distance to a school and 15 to a playground. I think that may be a little inaccurate. If it may push some properties up to the top, even though they don't meet that art or eyeball test. So that was just a thought I had on this one in particular. I think I'd be a little safer saying it's within 3/4 of a mile and all sidewalk without having to cross a road, or I don't know what. That's just a thought I had on this particular one in reading it. You all might be totally fine with it. Maybe I'm reading into it too much. I don't know, but that was just a thought I had.
So I agree with you, Chris, on this one. It's like, who is the walker? We haven't established that with this question. And, what time of day is it? Like, there's times that it is walkable and times that it isn't walkable. So, and I don't know how to get this question any better other than to say, like, we'll know it when we see it. If it's something to keep in mind. I don't know that we can say what the points should be.
And the points, I think, should be reflective of what is our level of import on each particular item.
Yeah.
So Waha and Housing Partnership has made it clear what they consider to be important by their point system. But I think we need to come up with ours.
Right.
I think that it's access to schools and playgrounds. I think we can consider it as we look at things, like if we take a couple of examples, I mean, if it's Blue Hill Drive, that's not going to get any points because regardless of what the distance, I mean, it just feels like it's pretty far away. Whereas something that's, that's in Islington Center, even if it's, a longer, if it's more than half a mile walk. I think it'll be a discussion as we look at actual properties. And so it's also access could just mean close. It doesn't necessarily mean walkable. You know, it could be that, again, the Blue Hill Drive is not going to have either way because it's a drive out to Canton Street and over to Downey and all is pretty low score for that access and any way you do it. Whereas there's other places that might be physically close without a sidewalk, but it's, you know, it's still good for access to the schools and playgrounds. But I think we'll just have to, when we get actual examples, I think we can sort it out. I had a question about the green space one. Would that be like near the woods sort of thing? Because the actual parcel, like you can't really build in the mature trees to be saved and all, because they're not gonna be saved if someone builds a multifamily housing. How does that work into this?
So you mean where's the green space in relation to the lot? Is
Yeah,
it on
like,
the lot?
would
or
you
is
give
it
more
adjacent?
points? Would you give more points if it's? Does that mean a zone gets more points if it's close to conservation land or?
Yeah, I think the intent of this is we need to find out, what they meant. Or
I
what
could
it-
just comment on that. So our thought was that the green space could actually be on the lot, that some lots could be developed for housing and still maintain some vegetation, especially in a perimeter fashion around the lot, and others couldn't. Some are already green areas that have vegetation in the perimeter of the lot where the interior might be developed for housing, and you could still maintain a buffer. And other properties don't have mature trees now. So there would be less of a buffer to whatever the uses are around them.
Nora, I'm glad you've chimed in here because you reminded me of something you said during one of our partnership meetings that was a surprise to me, I guess. And that is, you remarked, and I hope you could remember what you said about the expected size of this zone from the Attorney General's office relative, and your answer was they would be reviewing it possibly relative to the other size of zones we have in our town.
Right. So we don't have clear guidance from the state yet. All we have is them telling us it has to be a district of reasonable size. So one of my concerns is that they may look at Westwood's zoning districts and say, well, what is the smallest zoning district Westwood has today? If we're proposing a zoning district that's 1/10 of the size of our smallest zoning district, they might determine that that's not reasonable size. So I think
would they consider, say, the medical use that we just passed as a town, even though they haven't ruled on it yet? Would that size?
Possibly, or our ARO districts, that I would say that is probably I'm not sure if that's our smallest district or if one of our residential districts are smaller. I'd have to look closely at the map. I know we have some very large ones. SRE and SRC are very large districts, but we have others, SRD, I think, SRB, General Residence District, and ARO are not that large. So I don't know that that's what the state is looking for us to go similar in size to districts we already have. Maybe our smallest district might be one of the local business districts, or our industrial office district might be one of the smallest ones. But I would think that if we were trying to propose a district that's a single acre or even 3 acres, I don't think that's going to fly.
Which was my concern when you said that, is how are we going to identify 5 acres of land that are not currently being used and possibly for sale? As you know, we're trying to identify a point system here for these things to make it easy for a developer to come in and do this. When you said that, I just initially just got really, oh wow, how are we going to do this? That's a lot.
The one thing I'd point out is that just like we've done with our ARO district, it's in more than one place.
or local business A district is in more than one place. Same with local business B. We actually have a single lot that's in local business B down Hogan Tire is the same zone as Roach Brothers, but it's a different piece of it. So I think that the board may be most successful by looking at more than one of these multifamily districts. Maybe there are 3 small districts instead of 1 large one.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for that. I think that's helpful for everyone to consider when we go forward looking at properties. So next we were on promotes equity or parking availability. I can't remember where we left off.
I think parking availability was the last one under promotes family supportive housing.
Okay.
And both WAHA and housing partnerships were the same with, if you were to consider a property that allowed for potential structured parking, and then 5 points if it was potential for surface parking. But criteria 4A was getting at that, comparing whatever you propose, comparing that to the size of our existing zoning districts. So that's looking at what you and Nora were just talking about, is trying to get at if the district size is comparable to other zones that we have in town.
Chris, I'm sorry, could we go back up to 3?
What part?
So I'm not sure which version I'm looking at. So if we're looking at the housing partnership list, is that the one that housing partnership? Thank
I
you.
think partnership is the one we're looking at on the screen.
Yep, thank you. So the residential desirability, 3B, plus 5 points for positive physical features and negative 5 points for negative I don't know what that means.
Would that, Nora or Abby, would that be talking about topography or what?
Or, right, so actually this is the one that WAHA changed, and they changed it to proximity to an existing,
Oh,
single
other
family
residential neighborhood.
or, yep. Because they thought the physical characteristics were unclear as well, so they were trying to measure that to see. They were trying to get at a way to determine, if you had, looking for a place for family housing, what's attractive for families. And so they came up with being close to other residential, so not being in, a commercial area or not in the industrial area. So other being near other neighborhoods.
So they put in 10 points for within an existing neighborhood and 15 if adjacent to a single family neighborhood.
Yeah.
That was
Right,
their answer to that.
And so what I'm confused about with those is we're also giving points if it's a mixed use, right? Like, so we're just kind of giving points and
Kind of a mixed message.
yeah. So I just feel like we maybe don't need to give points in either of those circumstances if we're going to give points for everything.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Pardon the pun.
And that's, where we as a board, I think, need to come up with either, as Kate said, remove points for both, keep points for both, which does seem a little unnecessary, or determine that it's not a necessary criteria.
Or just list it as a consideration without any points. I mean, maybe.
You could have, there is the third option, like there can be some places that where it's conflicting, this is in a mixed use or this is in a commercial area, but it's not residentially desirable. Another place is residentially, there's industrial locations like, say next to Lambert's on Route 1, like that might not score any points in either dimension. So you might want to, it still makes sense. I think there can be combinations when you vet things out.
Okay, I can go with that. And it also just brings me back to what we were talking about with access to the schools and the playgrounds is, we don't know what a developer may want to do. They may include a playground in their development. Like, so we're giving a property a hit when it might actually be a benefit to create a new one. So anyway, this is tough business. I appreciate everybody's attention to it. I can do whatever Dave recommends on this.
Okay. Abby, can you scroll down to equity, promotes equity? Can you define that a little better, Abby?
Right, so 4B was the looking at assessed property values. You know, the idea here was looking at, when you look at locations, look at the assessed property value, and are you picking properties that are valuable, or are you picking a property that's the least valuable, and how does that compare to the areas around it? So that was something to look at. And then we also thought environmental factors. If there's if you're looking at a location that involves a lot of hazards that need to be cleaned up, that's points are negative points, because that would need to happen first. And again, that would take commitment from a developer, and so that would be a deterrent for that to eventually be developed. It would just be something that would take a lot of time and money before a housing development would be proposed. So it's essentially a less attractive site for a residential property if there's environmental concerns.
Yeah, Kate.
So can I make a recommendation on this one, that first point, the unmitigated environmental hazards, that might be better located under the developability section, and that these other 2 points about
Value,
proximity,
size.
well, and the ongoing industrial pollution, like that's certainly something that is attached to equity, and the highway pollution is certainly attached to equity. But that first point, I feel like is more about, is it attractive to a developer? Are they going to have to do work on the site to develop it? Is my thought.
So just that first one, the unmitigated environmental hazards, you suggest moving that up to the criteria 1. Okay.
Criteria, yeah.
At first glance, I guess I would agree that it does appear to possibly land better in that one than the
Is
equity
this,
one.
so what kind of equity is it? Sort of, I would think it would be things, so like if you have a good sized, a district size that's similar to others, you're thinking that that's an equitable way to do things, versus picking a really tiny district in the hopes that it doesn't get developed or something. Like, these seem to be kind of, are they?
Yeah, to that point, Dave, I think, if Nora's suggestion is taken and we take 3 smaller parcels, none of them are going to match the parcel that they're within. If it's in SRA, which is that one of the larger ones, SRC, I can't remember which is the largest one. But if it's within that, it's going to be 1.5 acres, 2, 3 acres. It's not going to be at all close to what the zone is within. So if I'm understanding this correctly, there's no way it could be compatibility with most of our single residence zones. Is that?
Right. I think I think when I first looked at the equity criteria, I was trying to look at, multifamily, and where are you, are you being equitable putting it at a desirable location, or are you putting it, in the corner of town near the train tracks, in a place that nobody really wants to live? So I thought that was not consistent with the state's goals of providing, safe, fair, friendly, family-friendly housing. So that's kind of what I was looking at. Equity is, a use that is desired in town. If you would want it, you would, not, zone it at a location that is more attractive. And so this is really just getting at, where would it be located? Is it going to be near the highway in the corner of town, or so, that's where I talked about the value of the property, the size, and environmental hazards. So that was just my original thinking when I created this criteria.
Any other questions about criteria 4, equity? All right. Let's move down to criteria 5 if we could, Abby, thanks. Likelihood of obtaining town meeting success. We only need a majority vote. We don't need a 2/3 vote on this, per the state. So obviously, noise and traffic impacts have been called very badly here from both groups. I forget what Waha put in this. They both left it at -10 points, and then the same level of points for potential public safety impacts, for response time for fire. And then Waha added potential school enrollment impacts with -10 points for potential to overburden schools. I think schools, by that, we're all in agreement, they're meaning elementary schools, since all the kids are getting pushed to Thurston and or the high school. So, and they put, -10 points. And that was reflected somewhere else, wasn't it, in the other one, Abby?
Right. In the housing partnership draft that we're looking at, it was first under here, under financial
Right,
impact to the
financial
town.
impact.
But Waha pointed out that they thought it made more sense that it would be under the category where he talked about town meeting success, because that's one of the most common objectives, or that you commonly hear when something's proposed at town meeting is impacts to the schools, and how the whole town-wide would perceive that. So they took the same recommendation, but they moved it up under
They
this
just moved
category.
it, right? So it's just a difference that I was pointing out. They saw it landing better in a different one than originally. Was there one more recent neighborhood experience? And Abby, how is that intended to be read?
The thought here was, based on the experiences that we've seen with development over the, recent years, we've had a lot of development in both areas near the train station. So kind of just taking into consideration, any location that you propose, what those past experiences have been. We've had a lot the last few years at Islington, and then also a lot of new development within the last several years around University Station, or University Station at that train station there.
Okay. Any other comments or thoughts on this criteria section?
I'm not sure how you can score them differently. How you can make a distinction like the impact ones, because by creating a multifamily zone, it's like the impact on the schools, it doesn't matter where it is, it's going to potentially have the same impact. So it kind of brings back in the things that they're trying to avoid with this. I think it's in context of how likely is it to be supported? Yeah, but like the impact on the town, I think you have to assume that it is what it is. Once somebody can do it by right, it's going to be, I can't see how you would differentiate a different zone as being less impact.
Probably the only way it would have differing impacts is the size of the property in each location. If you had a 5-acre zone or property in the Hanlon area, it's going to affect it a lot more than a 1-acre zone in the Downey area. It'll affect Hanlon much more than Downey, because there's the likelihood of more children living in the larger lot. So I think
So
that's
if I
the
could
only,
also just expand on that, I think certainly in our discussion with the Westwood Housing Authority, there was some talk about some of the elementary schools have more capacity than others. And so if you were locating a multifamily housing complex within a district where the students would go to a school that is at or near capacity, that would be less favorable than locating it at a site where there's an elementary school that has more capacity available.
but wouldn't that be dependent upon the size of the lot that's available within that school district?
That would absolutely be a different factor. So you'd have two factors. You'd have one, the size of the lot would determine how many students might come out of it. The size of the lot determines the size of the multifamily complex that could come out of it and how many students might come from that facility. But in addition to that, if you had a parcel near Downey, it might score differently than a parcel near Hanlon, and that might score differently than a parcel near Martha Jones, all based on how much room is in the schools at right now when you're considering these. And that's something that changes. Our districts change and our enrollment changes. It more or less changes as a town, but there are some districts that have higher attendance currently than others.
And I know we talked about, we are free to explore all properties in town, but the only ones that are going to satisfy the state's requirement are those within a half mile. So for our town, that's pretty much Downey and Hanlon are the two school, elementary schools that are going to be affected by this if we're going to, comply with the law here.
And do we happen to know as a group where the Downey is as far as maximum enrollment and current enrollment?
I don't know if, I don't know who has that information.
I won't say for certain, but just based on my time subbing there a couple years ago and friends who have children there, I'm not sure about like regular capacity, but the building itself is pretty full because they have a lot of programs over there. So I don't think there's a lot of extra space, physical space at Downey, at least not today.
I think we'd have to get some information from the school department there. I mean, we know the numbers at Hamlin just for the obvious reason, recent activity there.
Yeah.
And we know what's going to be there eventually in fall of 24 if it all plays out. So that, I think that speaks again to Kate's comment of this is not as formulaic as we would love it to be, but there's a nuance to each of these decisions of each lot. And they may not, every aspect of the lot is not going to be reflected in this scorecard.
To that point, Chris, you mentioned information from the school department. It might be worthwhile to have someone, be it administration or school committee, kind of sit in on one of our meetings and maybe give us some input on, from that perspective of impact to schools, enrollment, districts, that kind of thing. It might be helpful to have input from someone from that department.
And I know when University Station came through, they put in, Nora, how many of the apartments are Abby down at 300?
350 apartments and 100 condominiums.
And I think the guess at the time was 75 students, and I think it resulted in like 50 students. And it's always fluctuating, I know, but is that fairly accurate, Nora?
I think the estimate just for the 350 apartments was a range, and I think it went from 59 to 63.
Okay.
And I think we came in, I couldn't tell you what it is today, but at my most recent check, it was in the low 50s. So
Okay.
less than the range that was predicted, but not that far
They were
off.
fairly close, but again,
Right.
that's 50 K through 12
Correct,
students.
correct.
So I think when we're talking about a multifamily, we're talking about 15 units. So if we do an acre, there's 15 units. This is 350 units. Again, there's only two bedrooms maximum, so it's not apples to apples. But we're probably not talking about completely inundating an elementary school here. It could be kids of any age. But there's the possibility if we have a 5-acre lot, 15 times 5, that's what we have to accept as a possibility for a school impact.
Yeah, and I think if I understood, one of the goals of the state law is to encourage family-friendly housing. I think that is going to draw families, people with more children. So whereas I don't think that was the explicit goal of the apartments
No.
at University Station. So
Absolutely.
I agree. We're not necessarily looking at the same kind of volume of units that we're seeing at University Station, but I would think that the draw and the number of children that may come in proportionally is going to be higher. So
Yeah, I agree. But it's really just going to depend on the size of the lot that we
Yeah.
choose to determine just how much of an impact it's going to be for either of the elementary schools. Any other comments on schools? All right. What are we on? Financial impact to town, which 6C does, we've already just talked about that. Pardon me. So current zoning designation, 5 points if it's already residentially zoned, 10 points, minus 10 if it's commercially zoned. Abby, how does that, I'm thinking about the proximity to mixed use. If it's possibly already zoned commercially, again, let's call it what it is. We're talking about Islington or University Station, because those are the two train stations we're trying to build around. Minus 10 points if it's commercially zoned, and yet we want them near the mixed use. We're giving a positive to be near mixed use. So we want them to be near it, but have it be zoned already residential. It's
Well,
kind of a difficult.
The idea here was that if you propose the new multifamily zoning over a residential property, that property has, currently in the past been taxed at a residential rate, so a lower rate than the commercially zoned properties. If you were to propose this new district on a commercial property, it could potentially lose that commercial tax base, which is taxed at a higher rate.
So that's
There is some provisions in the law that also, kind of encourages mixed use development as well. They have in the new law, they talk, encourage, and they talk about, and they allow the smart growth districts. So those are usually encouraging upper story housing with ground floor commercial on the first floor and residential above. So there is a way to do mixed use, but if you are taking a commercial property and making, multifamily by right, that has the potential to make it all residential and take that out of our commercial taxable land.
So that's why it's.
So that's why it gives the negative points.
Gotcha. Current use of property plus 10 if existing multifamily with 25 or more units, plus 5 if vacant or underutilized buildings, minus 5 if undeveloped field or forest land. And that losing an undeveloped field or forest land, if they built it on that, how is that a financial impact to the town? Is that an aesthetic impact or a financial impact?
So that's a financial impact because land that's completely undeveloped and in its natural state costs the town nothing. Land that's already in a commercial state or in a residential state has some costs already. So you're not going from zero up to the final cost of whatever this new development will have. So there's a basis. You're already above zero on the basis if it's already developed land. And then if it's vacant or underutilized land, then it's land that we would prefer to see developed because it's not productive. But to the extent that we can save forest land as forest land, that keeps it financially not a drain in any way on our tax base.
All right.
So, question about this one. I think that Waha gave very different points for existing multifamily 25 plus units. They said negative 10 versus
Plus 10.
plus 10. So I'd love to understand that a little bit better.
Right. So they are giving, their proposal was negative points if you are choosing a location where a multifamily already exists, because they see that as, and they saw that as a negative because it's not consistent with the state's goals of producing more housing. So for example, if you pick a location such as the 350 unit apartment building that already exists at University Station, if that's the location you choose, that's not really meeting the state's law of producing more housing because it's already new development. So it's not likely that we're going to gain any new housing there. So that's why they switched it to negative points.
Right, so the board could choose the Gables apartment lots. There are 2 lots there. You could choose that as part of your district. Maybe you could choose it as your whole district, but you could certainly choose it as part of your district, and you would meet the spirit of the law. I mean, the letter of the law. You would comply with what the law says you have to do, but it wouldn't meet the spirit of the law because it wouldn't encourage the creation of new additional housing units. The units already exist.
Right. So I on the one hand, I hear that, Nora, for sure, but I think it's not a financial impact to the town, right? It's
Correct.
so it's in the wrong place, number one. But also number two, if we are going to go with more than one district, that might be a perfect district as one of them, because it is already a multifamily area. So I appreciate the distinction about wanting to follow the spirit of the law, which I am for, but I just want it to be a little bit more clean. I don't know where this, and again, it might be just a discussion point versus something that we even give actual points to.
Chris, is it all right if I speak, or do you want me to wait till the end?
Well, is this the end, Abby? Is this the last?
Yes. Yes, this is the end.
This is the end, so.
Well, it's your beginning, Lou, so.
Yeah, okay. Thanks.
Let us know your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, Kate, you hit the nail right on the head with, because I'm on both Housing Partnership and WAHA, was that's why we changed it to the negative points. We were more thinking there was going to be just like one. I mean, it'd be nice if we had 3, but when we looked at that for the minus 10 points, if it was existing multifamily, 25 plus, we said, the spirit of the law, we don't think is met by this moving this to it. So that's where it was. And, Abby, as usual, did a great job explaining, I think, the differences between the Housing Partnership and WAHA, and then of course you're the ones who are going to make the decisions, but just one of them that I don't think was pointed out, this mixed use development, and WAHA gave it 15 points, and the Housing Partnership on 2D, 2C, whatever. So on WAHA's it's 2B, and I think it's 2D on Housing Partnership. Gave it 5 points. And we just thought at WAHA that it would be, this mixed use is great because the commercial tax rate is, we all know 15% of the properties commercial, but they give they pay 25% of the taxes. So if you could come up with some sort of mixed use, we'd have a mixed rate in there. Other than that, if anyone has any questions that I can answer, but Abby did a great job explaining the differences.
Anyone have any questions for Lou and the thinking of, I guess, either board that he sits on? Looking for more clarity.
Chris, you and Kate have on both Housing Partnership and Planning Board, and I've got Housing Partnership and WAHA.
That's fine. We're all just here to
yeah,
get it right.
We're all one big happy family.
That's right. We're all just trying to get the right answer here. So any board members, with any questions for Lou specifically? Okay. I think, Mr. Alden, if you're ready, would love to hear your thoughts. If you have anything you'd like to add, if not, that's fine.
Yeah, thank you. The only thing I would add is obviously it's a difficult task to come up with a set of rules and guidelines when we don't really know what the game is yet. In our discussions with Waha, anyways, I kept saying the same thing, that I'm looking over this list and deciding what criterias are important, wearing my Waha hat, as I think everyone is. So if I was on the planning board or the housing partnership, I would make a different criteria, but wearing the housing authority hat and strictly looking at it from that point of view, I think that's how we came up with, the list that we came up with.
Yeah, and I mentioned, each housing partnership and housing authority, as Eric put it, they wear a hat and they have a particular angle that they're looking at this, I guess a particular set of lenses, for lack of a better way to put it. We have yet another that we have to consider. This is our starting point. And there's a lot to weed through. We've gone through the whole draft, line item by line item. I would love to hear thoughts from all board members to see if we're in the right direction. Are we going through an exercise here that ultimately we're still not even going to end up with a tool that we can use successfully? There's a part of me right now that says I think we could probably identify the 5 best spots by looking at a map, knowing the nuances of our town and the things, and we can maybe measure that against some of these things that are on this list that we're pulling up. But this is a collective effort, and my video froze at a good spot. So I'd like, to hear, we need to hear from everyone because we're all going to vote on this. Ellen.
Sure, I'll start or follow. I really appreciate seeing both the similarities and the differences from Housing Partnership and Waha, because I think there is a lot of synergy between those two groups. So it is really helpful for me to see where they differ. I also appreciate the conversation that we're having about the different lenses, because I do think when we start opening up these conversations to the public, we're going to see that on a macrocosmic level, that different residents in different neighborhoods are going to have different priorities for how we approach this. So I think this is all really productive and a really good start to approach it. I also agree with you that I think just based on the reality of what Westwood looks like or is comprised of land-wise, we probably could look at a map today and pick 5 parcels that seem to make the most sense, and then kind of evaluate them against some of this criteria. Some of this criteria I think is going to be difficult to fill. Like if we're looking for an area that would allow for 150 units because there's bonus points there, but is also near a train station and isn't already developed with large scale. Like I just don't know that some of these parcels exist. They might be like unicorns. We may not be able to find something that ticks those boxes, or it'll tick some, but then it actually cancels out others. But I like the checklist. I think it's good to have some sort of benchmarks, and I appreciate these 2 sets of checklists as a great place for us to start. I think we've already had some really productive conversations about this, and I'm excited to continue the conversations and eventually, start having the public start weighing in as well, because I think that's going to be, if one of our goals is something we can take to town meeting and get a majority, I think, the resident feedback is going to be a large part of that.
I agree. We're obviously at the starting point here, but I think it's important to remember, Abby, how many more meetings do we have to discuss this before we start using this tool? And because we need it done by December 15th, mid-December.
I mean, you don't need, but I would say that's a good goal. So you could submit it to the state
Yeah,
before.
I guess my point is, we don't have
Do
6
you have,
months to
right,
work on this tool and then come up with a final decision. So we do need to keep this thing going. And we need to make big leaps of progress. Tom, you had your hand up.
Yeah, all of these, the two lists, we're gonna have most of what is in them in mind when we finally decide on what parcels we're actually going to consider. We're sort of operating in the dark right now. And without further guidance from the state, we're not really sure what's going to be acceptable to them. So it seems to me that identifying 5 or 6 parcels is important. And then to amalgamate these two lists together and use them as criteria to decide which is the best ones to put into the zoning bylaw is important. So I think we need to work towards it, but until we identify particular parcels, I don't know where we're going.
And to further Nora's point, Tom, if we find 5 parcels, we may need to use all 5 to get a collective size that the Attorney General will accept as a reasonable size lot.
Yes, and again, that's my point, is that we don't know that yet.
No, we don't, but we've been charged as of last January to come up with this zone. And while they haven't given us a deadline, I believe Mr. Ahern gave us the indication. I'm at a loss. Nora or Abby, do you recall what the timeline intimation was?
I think it was as soon as you can. So it depended on your town meeting schedule. If you're able to do it in the upcoming town meeting, you're encouraged to do it.
Abby, have you touched base with your counterparts in other towns? See how they're approaching this?
I don't know that too many communities have. I know a couple have talked about it. They, many communities, for example, the one I live in, they've mentioned that they may have to make changes, but I don't know. I haven't seen too many move forward. I don't know that.
I have access to the town council's website, and there's nothing going on with them. Nobody's asking any questions about this. So I think we're probably far ahead of anybody else at this point.
From people I've spoken to, it sounds like most are waiting for further guidance from the state. But there's also a fear that once that guidance comes, it'll almost be too late to act. And so we're trying to get out ahead of it, have a longer, more thoughtful process about what districts make the most sense in Westwood, and then be prepared to have something that can be judged against the guidance when it comes. So it's not a perfect process, but our hope is that we can at least be ready. And if the planning board comes forward with the proposal that doesn't work for town meeting, it won't be approved, and we'll be back at the drawing board trying again. So we're trying to get more guidance from the state. It's just not forthcoming yet.
I agree with you, Nora.
Right, and I would just add further to that a lot of communities have representative town meeting, or summer cities, so their zoning process isn't as long as ours is. Ours really begins when the warrant closes in early January, and the vote's not until May. So some communities, their process isn't as long. Sometimes they'll have public hearings, later in the spring for a spring town meeting. So we're familiar in Westwood with our process, so that's why we're really trying to get started early, earlier than some other communities.
And oh, sorry, go ahead.
Nora or Abby, if we go through this whole process and we go through our town meeting in May and it's approved, and then in June, we get information from the state that almost invalidates our choice, where does that leave us? Are we at square one? Or
well, then I think you have a decision to make. If if what you've done is not sufficient to meet the state law, the question is, do you need to do more, or do you need to rethink it and start from square one? I wouldn't think you'd go back, because I would think that whatever properties you've selected made sense, or they wouldn't have gotten out of the planning board, and they certainly wouldn't have gotten past town meeting. But if it's still not enough to satisfy the state, then I think you need to add on to it. I don't think you're going back to square one.
Yeah, as I think about it, it seems to me the only thing we're probably, I mean, if we follow their spirit and their letter of the law, the only thing we might be in violation of is the lot is not of reasonable size.
So I think the two biggest questions are reasonable size, and then what, I wouldn't call it exactions, but what requirements we can place on this by right housing. For instance, can we require affordable housing, and can we require a mixed use component? Those are two questions that we don't have enough guidance from the state to answer. But I don't think that in any event, if you had adopted a new multifamily district and it had gotten by town meeting and went to the Attorney General's office, I don't think it would be rejected as a multifamily district. You might get a word that, thank you for doing this, but you're not quite there yet in meeting this new law, in which case you would have to do something to change what you had adopted. Maybe it's removing the affordability requirements or a mixed use district, or maybe it's increasing the size of the district.
Okay.
I hope we don't come to that. I hope we get guidance before we actually go to town meeting.
Or guidance with enough time to act on it,
Right.
if needed.
But the longest part of acting, I think, is the start that you're on right now, where you're looking at the criteria, you're setting the playing field, and then you're going to go and look at the sections of the town that you think make the most sense, and having lengthy public input. So the sooner that we start the discussions, the more thorough the process is, and the more likely the planning board will get to a proposal that meets with success at town meeting, and hopefully meets with state approval.
I think we may have done this before, but I'll re-ask the question. Is the board in agreement of going down this path? Understanding that we may have to make a 180-degree pivot to some extent or less, so that we do go down at least as far as we can. Because if we're not, then we need to have another conversation. I would say this is incredibly important, and right now we have the time to talk about these things. So I just want to make sure
I think
we're
we're
on the same page.
I think we're proceeding properly, and I think we should continue.
Okay.
So that
Anyone disagree with that? Okay. All right.
Just if I may,
Yes, Lou.
I don't mean to be putting this on our newest employee, Ilana, but maybe she's from the Department of Housing and Community Development. Maybe we could get the name of the person who's putting this together and ask when they're going to send more guidance on this. I don't know, Abby, maybe you want to do it as a group with different town planners. And the last time they sent us anything was in January, and I had hoped by now we would have gotten something else.
I know I saw something over the summer from the Attorney General's office, I want to say in July, and they said they put out a survey to communities maybe in June, and then in July I saw something that went over the Mass Planners listserv saying they are working on getting out guidance. So they know it's still forthcoming. They didn't give a timeline, but that was in July.
Okay.
They're not sitting on information and not dishing it out. Any other thoughts from board members? We did have a couple questions in the Q&A, which I'll read.
I did, before you do that,
Oh,
I did
yeah.
just want to say,
Please.
sorry, I did just want to say, I think this process has been so great, and I'm so glad that we're doing it in our meetings, because it's all on Westwood Media Center for people to be able to see how we're getting, where we're getting. And it's just been, I think, a really valuable use of time. So thank you, Chris, for chairing these meetings. I think it's where I was hoping we would be.
Thank you. First question was from Fran Fusco, said, I'd like to know what is the financial gain to the town if we zone for this denser zoning versus if we don't? I think I mean, it's not a question of do we want to do this? We have been told we have to do this. And I think it's been brought up, the question has been asked by other people, what if we don't? And there are some grants that we would not be in line for, and whether or not we utilize them now isn't really the question, because we may want or need access to them later. And the other concern that was brought up is, while this is new right now, if say in 2 years or 3 years, when this is already expected to be done, a developer, in theory, I believe legally could come in and to Westwood and say, where's your zone for by right multifamily housing? Because I want to build there. And if we don't have a zone, then I believe that just about anywhere within that half-mile radius could be subject to a development like this. So I think it gets back to, if you don't zone it, it's everywhere, because the state is presuming we're zoning for this. And if we don't, there's a possibility. At the very least, it may have to go to a lawsuit, which we then have to defend ourselves. Again, the spirit of this from the state is we're looking for more housing. I think Westwood is in agreement as a town. We're looking for more housing. This is not the type of housing we typically see in Westwood, but we are an MBTA community with a train, and these are the rules that have been handed to us. And I believe if we don't do it, we're not doing our job. And I think I believe we're putting ourselves out for further exposure if we don't do this. Any other comments on that particular question if we don't?
Yeah, and it's also in line with our comprehensive plan.
It's another good point. Thank you for bringing that back up.
I think it's also, as I think Abby had mentioned, or someone, like we're not under pressure right now. And so, I mean, it's a fine line between people are going to ask that, well, why don't we just not do it? If it's, how much is this really going to cost us? But right now we're not under any pressure to come up with this. And so we will probably do better with this process than if suddenly the guidance comes out and we're basically scrambling to get it done immediately. We could go all the way to town meeting with a proposal and it could get shot down. At least we would have this framework and this approach, and there would have been the engagement with the housing authority, and all that work is building our awareness of this issue. So I guess that's my thought, is that we're not under pressure at the moment, and so we'll probably do better than if we wait until someone really is telling us, that you have 6 months to implement this or else. And then we'll have the problem of not being able to have enough public input or something. So I'd say we made some progress here. And we should probably talk more about, throw some specific locations out there and see what happens as we discuss them, see how this thing goes along, and just realize that, yeah, we're not no one's holding a gun to our head forcing us to do this now. So let's take advantage of that time to have a good discussion.
Thanks, Dave. The second question, which I'll read, is by Fran Fusco. It says, why is this being pushed now? What is the deadline? And I think we just talked about the deadline has never been set. But we are, I believe, under the expectation that come our town meeting in May, we should have something ready to go. And why is this being pushed now? I think we just had a discussion on that. So I think we answered that particular question. Another question just came in again from Fran Fusco. Just to confirm, we would lose grant money if we don't zone for this. How much? And I don't think it's that we would lose grant money specifically. we would lose access to certain grants. And I don't know if we're currently utilizing the grants that are mentioned. Abby, do you have those names of the grants?
I will pull them up right now. It's from your August presentation. It was the Housing Choice Initiative, Local Capital Projects Funds, and MassWorks Infrastructure Grants. So right now there's no opting in, but I expect when the state sends out their guidance, they may include a time frame for which the communities have to comply. So we don't know when we'll get that, but I expect that may be something, kind of the timeline when communities need to adopt something by, that may be included then.
And do you know if we currently utilize any of those grants?
I'm not sure.
If you want to get back to us, that's fine.
Okay.
And again, I think the point had been made earlier by somebody at one of our meetings, that it's not necessarily are we using them now, but if we are denied the opportunity in the future, then that's obviously opportunity lost because of the decision to do nothing now. And I operate that's I'm not doing my job if I choose to do nothing. I see it as a greater risk to do nothing in this particular situation and in most situations, but I won't say all. So, okay, I think we addressed and answered that question. I don't see any other people looking to speak and attendees. So going forward, we have 2 meetings in November. What are those dates, Abby?
November 9th and November 30th. So you have time if you want to make changes to the scorecard tonight, or if you want to at your next meeting, you do have time at your next meeting. Yeah, you have plenty of time at your next meeting to start going through properties if that's what you want to do. If you want to further revise this and then start going through properties, or if you want to start going through properties at your next meeting.
So I believe 3 board members today spoke on the possibility of maybe using this as a guide for discussion points about certain properties in town. And maybe that might be the route to go. Instead of going back and forth on points versus no points, maybe we go back and forth in discussions on addresses or plots of land, and using this scorecard as a reference for important points to bring up and remind ourselves, yeah, that might be a great property, but it has these 3 really bad negatives and that are identified on the scorecard. So I did hear from 3 people. I've said that, Ellen made mention to that, and I believe Tom made some allusion to something similar to that. Is that a route that this board thinks we should go, or do we want to spend more time reading through the scorecard and getting all the points and the criteria correct? Or do we just want to feel our way through it using this as a guide? What's the collective sense? Tom, you have a thought?
I agree with what you just said, Chris.
Okay. Anyone else have thoughts on what maybe we should do for the remainder of this meeting or the start of the next meeting? Do we continue down the road of fine tuning the scorecard? Do we use it as a jumping point to identify addresses? Dave?
I agree with what you're saying there. I think I would just put those 2 lists together, maybe with the points from both next to it, and then just start discussing it, like versus trying to fine tune it further. Because I think that, putting actual properties out there will get people interested in this issue, which is good and bad, but I think you just got to start.
Well, it's got to happen at some point. We have to identify plots of land that we think are right for this. Kate, do you have any thoughts?
No, I agree. If Abby could just also incorporate any changes that were made this evening to the merging of those two documents, I think it's great, and we'll start looking at addresses at our next opportunity.
Ellen, I don't see your video. I don't know if you did check out, but I wanted to give you an opportunity. I want to speak for you. If you're.
She let me know she had someone fixing her boiler. She just had to run out.
Got it. Okay. Then we'll proceed with the understanding that, and I, correct me if did I hear Ellen correctly, that she was on a similar mindset that maybe.
That's what I heard.
Okay. And again, I don't want to put words in her mouth. So I think I think for the next one, let's try to come prepared with let's look at maps ourselves and come prepared with some, names or addresses, names of plots of land or however you want to do it, that you think would suit. And we did talk about, do we want to open this up to the entire town? Or do we want to look at satisfying the state requirement first and then opening it up to the town? How's the board feel about those two? Do you want to focus on the half mile from Islington train and University Station? Or do you want to open it up to look at all parts of town? Just so we know where to look on maps.
I think we have to stay focused. Sorry, Tom.
It's okay. No, I think, Chris, that we need to focus on the 2 train stations.
Okay, I would agree. Dave, do you agree with that, or?
Yeah, I think there's not, it's driven by the need to comply with being half mile from the train station. So it wouldn't make any sense to evaluate a property that was on the other, end of town or something that was outside of that wasn't going to do anything for this purpose. Unfortunately, it does concentrate it on the train stations on Islington and Downey, but that's what the requirement is.
And I think it's an important distinction to remind ourselves, we don't even know how they're measuring the half mile. If it's as a crow flies or walkability or drivability, we have no idea. So we may have to have some parcels in reserve just in case whatever we choose doesn't fly. So, so anyway, Abby, maybe we could, when we meet next, we could have that, the aerial shot that you had of showing, and maybe there's a way we can figure out, a half mile driving versus as a crow flies. I don't know what that does for each location. Yeah, Kate?
Sorry, I just have one other question. Are we sure even that it's half a mile with the train station in the center of that half mile, or is it a half mile in either direction from the train station?
From the extended borders of the train station?
Is it, hey, here's the train station, half a mile this way, half a mile that way?
I know at Islington, you might buy a little bit more, not Islington, 128, the parking garage extends closer to Blue Hill Ave, say. If you consider the far corner of the parking garage by Del Frisco's versus where the trains actually physically stop. I don't know how much that gains you, maybe 200 yards, 100 yards. I don't even know how much that
But
is.
like but my question is, Chris, like, so if you're at the train station, any place in that train station, is it a half mile with the train station as a starting point for measuring the half mile? Or is it a half mile, quarter mile in one direction, quarter mile in the other direction, and the train station is the center? Does that make sense?
It's a radius from the train.
Well, yeah.
Is it radius? Okay,
We're
sorry.
under the
I'm sorry.
presumption, again, without further guidance, we're under the presumption that we've been operating under a linear half mile as a crow flies.
Gotcha. Okay, sorry.
Probably
I have not
closest
been
one.
drinking, just so you know. It's just a little late for me. Sorry.
Okay. And we also don't know about the bus stops and what they may do for availability up and down Washington Street. If they, would add to our available plots of land. So anyway, we do just have to operate with the understanding we may have to about face at any given time. But yeah,
just want to suggest so if next meeting, why don't we just define the areas, not get into a discussion of actually applying so we'll get this worksheet. Let's go ahead and get that sort of merged into a form that we're okay, we have a list of all the factors to consider, and let's set that aside. And then at the next meeting, just focus on just labeling and sort of defining, okay, we might consider, this property or that property, but not actually go through the, weighing the pros and cons yet. Because what I'm thinking here is how can we want to stimulate a public discussion about this, but we don't want to be we're trying to force something either, we want to, can we come up with these, if we identify the different the area, the location, say, okay, this is what we call this one, this is what we call that one. And then maybe at the next meeting, we start to have that walking down the list of discussing the pros and cons of those, but knowing that we're not going to cover them all in one meeting. I'm just, do you think that would be a good, is they're trying to balance this with, we don't want to be moving as though we're trying to push something through, but we also want to make progress on this discussion and also get people engaged in raising their concerns outside of this board. So I'm trying to think of how can we effectively do that.
So if I'm understanding, when you're thinking that the identification of certain plots of land are going to spark interest in this to further discussion amongst the community.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what people are gonna, but I think, it's just, if you put I hesitate to say it in such an extreme way, but it's basically okay, if you say planning board is going to consider whether we should have multifamily housing at X, okay, that's going to generate a lot more interest than we're working on a questionnaire and eventually we're going to make some decisions or something, right? So I think when you start to pin it down to specific locations, then you have the risk that people will say, oh my God, the planning board has decided that they're going to do X, Y, and Z. But I think that if you can get those locations out as this, we're going to consider 5 or 10 different places, I think that's the right process. And then you have another meeting where you can actually start to discuss them one at a time or something.
So I don't disagree that I think identifying plots of land is definitely going to spark interest amongst people in that neighborhood, at least, if not obviously the whole town. So if we do that on November 9th, and then on, what's the next one, Abby?
November 30th.
30th. So if we do that on the 9th, we identify, that leaves us with November 30th, and then how many in December?
December 14th.
December 14th. And we might get one more meeting in January before we have to be done with the discussion of where. So is that enough time to discuss the merits of 5 to 10 parcels of land? I want to make sure we're not biting off more than we can chew. I mean, you see how much time this discussion has taken. And we need to have a consensus of at least 3 of us have to agree on a plot of land, or 5 plots of land, if that's what it takes to get a reasonable size lot. So I just want to make sure we have enough time to properly discuss this. Do we have many on the books or on the agenda for November 9th, Abby?
No, you have time on your November 9th meeting. You only have one application that's come in that I don't think will take too long.
Okay. So I guess just for point of, so it's all orderly, I would say submit your choices to Abby by, say, the Friday before our meeting on the 9th. Does that be enough time for you to, so that you can present it to us on the meeting of the 9th? And we know now everyone, and we may all 5 of us may agree on 3 of them right off the bat. We might submit all the same 3, and then we know where our collective heads are at. And then it's a discussion about some additional ones possibly. So I would submit, we submit these to Abby by that Friday, whatever that date is. I don't have a calendar in front of me.
November 5th, Friday, November 5th.
Okay. So does that seem reasonable for people to come up with addresses or description? Maybe if you need to screenshot and circle it, and if it doesn't have an address, do whatever you need to do to identify to Abby what plot of land you're talking about. And then Abby, maybe you can do additional research as to how big that plot is or that address is, so we know going forward how much we're looking at for acreage.
Right, and I can get the maps, we can pull up the map, for your next meeting.
Yeah, we'll
but
have
if
to
you-
do that.
So you can walk through each one, but if you have ideas to send me in advance, I could at least check the, property record card, the, any background or history about each property.
Does that sound reasonable for everyone in the next 2 weeks? Come up with however many plots you deem appropriate.
Good.
All right. So I haven't heard back from Ellen. It looks like she's still indisposed. So if there's nothing further to say, I think there was another question asked, so I'll read it. It was from Fran Fusco. It says, my understanding was the state put in the parameters of 1 acre, 15 units, age unrestricted. How are we getting to 5 different areas to rezone? I think the answer is in order to get what is determined to be a reasonable size zone to match our other zones in town, it's not likely that a 1 acre parcel of land is going to satisfy the state. So that we may have to split them up as we have done in the ARO zones, and split up the multifamily by right zone into multiple areas of town, or multiple, non-contiguous parcels of land. So I believe that's the answer to the question. That's how we're getting 5, and it may not be 5, it might be 3, it might be 7, I don't know. That's what our discussion will yield. Okay, Ellen, just to catch you up, we have decided that instead of continuing to discuss the merits of each line item of this scorecard and the relative points, we would like to take time to discuss certain properties and use the scorecard as a guidance of reminders of things that are important. And each planning board member can deem something as more important or less important in their own mind on a topic. So what we are going to do is sometime between now and November 5th, we're going to submit plots or addresses, or however you want to do it, to Abby that we would like to discuss at our November 9th meeting. And then Abby will have those and hold them and then present them to us, and we'll find out where we're all thinking in town, and we'll use the scorecard. And I think the request was meld the 2 together, and we'll come up with something that's usable for our discussion points at that November 9th meeting. And then Dave's suggestion was identifying those on November 9th, but not necessarily discussing them until our November 30th meeting, to get possible additional community interest to develop and grow in the month of November, essentially. And then we would have our December 14th meeting, and November 30th meeting to discuss the addresses and hopefully come up with something. And if we need one more meeting, we may be able to go in. What's our first meeting in January?
That's what you're gonna review next on your agenda. I put
Alright.
on some suggested dates for you.
Cart before the horse there. Sorry, but the first meeting in January may be reserved for this final discussion if necessary. We may not need it, but that's how the time frame that we talked about. So now you're up to speed as to what we talked about.
Thank you. And my apologies, I had to step away for a few, but thank you for the executive summary. I appreciate it.
Okay, so is that it for discussion on multifamily zoning for this meeting? Okay, Lou, thank you very much for joining us. I appreciate your input. And thank you also to Eric for joining us. Abby, we had nothing more to discuss on solar, nothing further to discuss yet?
Right, not yet. I haven't gotten back to updating the draft that we last saw in August. I will try to take another look at that and get an updated one to you and back to WEAC as well.
Okay. And you have this, you want to give us an update on Obed Baker House?
Right, the Obed Baker House RFP also went out recently. So that's another item that may come up if we get responses to that in early November. That may also include a zoning amendment that may be on the warrant for the spring. The last time we had a proposal a couple of years ago, or kind of right before the outbreak of the pandemic, there was a proposal submitted, but too much time had gone by and it varied from the original RFP, so a new one was released or is out right now. So that's one possible other zoning consideration that may come up later in the year.
Okay, we'll look for that. 394 Providence Highway. Quick little.
Also, this was the gas station on Route 1. They had contacted us about rezoning the full area that they use. There is some right of way that they're looking to extend the zoning district to so that they could redevelop and construct a new convenience store and the new gas station, similar to what they did down the other end of Providence Highway on the Dedham side.
Okay. We talked about the multifamily. So next we have dates, right? Am I missing anything there? Abby?
Oh, Ellen, sorry. Ellen has her hand raised.
I'm sorry, you were covered, Alan.
I tried it both ways, real life and with the
I'm
little
sorry.
icon. Before we
What's
move
up?
on, quick question about Obed Baker. You answered one of my questions, which was, I thought we had a proposal in the works, but to follow up on that, is the applicant who submitted something for that RFP, do you know if they're still interested?
I can tell you that before we sent out the new RFP, that applicant was still interested. I haven't spoken to him since the RFP's gone out. So my presumption is that he's still interested, but we probably won't know until the closing of the bid date.
Understood. Okay, thank you.
All right. So Abby, you want to go through dates, and are people prepared with their calendars to say if you're available?
Okay, I was thinking the first normal, regular meeting for you would be Tuesday, January 11th. Then 2 meetings in February would be Tuesday, February 1st and February 15th. Then in March, it would be March 8th and March 22nd. Then April would be Tuesday, April 12th, and then Monday, April 25th, because Tuesday, April 26th is the election day. And so I try to always, avoid school vacation weeks and then try to work have your meetings on opposite weeks of the FinCom's public hearings. So that way you would have your, your meeting 1 week prior to theirs, you make a recommendation, and then the public hearings with the FinCom, I had included in your packet, because those are Tuesday, March 1st, and then also Tuesday, March 29th. And then if they're not completed on one night, they'll continue to the following night. And so typically we have the public hearing open for the zoning changes at your second meeting in February, but sometimes we felt like that's not been enough time for you to have a full public hearing prior to going to FinCom. So one idea I had was having, with the goal of having your opening of your public hearing for the zoning amendments would be at your first meeting in February, which is February 1st. But then we would have to put the legal ad in the newspaper would be due January 5th. So I thought one option would be to tentatively schedule Tuesday, January 4th for you to have a meeting just to focus on the zoning. That way you could take another look, discuss the zoning, and review, a draft warrant article before the legal ad goes to the newspaper. And if you want to save that date, and then if you want to decide on December 14th, you can do that on December 14th. You could see how far you've gotten, and if you think you need a separate meeting on January 4th to give a, final look at the zoning prior to it going to the newspaper. How does that sound?
It sounds busy. If I can be honest. When would you need to know if January 4th was necessary? Is that something we can wait till our December 14th?
Yeah, you can wait to your December meeting. So my thought was, because that's only 1 week before your January 11th meeting. So I was thinking January 11th would be a regular meeting where you'd have applications, but you can decide on December 14th how far you get with the zoning article. And if you feel you need a special meeting on January 4th just to review zoning, you can wait till December 14th to decide that.
Okay. Does anybody have any personal problems or conflicts with the date suggested by Abby? Okay. And just a reminder, was it November 15th? We're meeting with the select board?
Yes, Monday, November 15th.
Okay. And it's at the Gillette meeting room in the police station, right?
Yes, I will double check it, but I think it was going to be a hybrid meeting.
Yeah. So we have the option if you're not able to get there or don't want to go there. I believe it's a hybrid meeting, so we could do it via Zoom. But I just want to make sure everyone had that on their calendar if they didn't already, since we're talking dates. All right. Then Abby, I think you can go forward and schedule using these dates. So next are draft minutes, unless someone has something else to talk about dates. Okay. Anyone have comments, opportunity to read? Yes, Kate.
So on page 3 of the minutes, in Ms. Fusco's comments, there's just a couple of places where a sentence begins with peer, and I think it is intended to read "it appears."
Yeah.
Thank you. And then a little bit later, maybe even the next sentence, it says fields B, and maybe what she meant was, will these fields be? So, if you could just reread her section,
Okay.
that'd be great.
And I brought up something about the same section to Abby earlier.
Okay, great. And there were a couple of very small typos here and there, but that one was like, oh, I'm not sure what she's saying. So, but I heard what she said. So,
if it was a typo in what Ms. Fusco wrote, I just do it verbatim.
Right. No,
But it sounds like it's something that I typed in myself, and I can fix.
yeah.
I just can't look at my minutes from last time when I'm doing these minutes.
That's fine. Thank you.
Yep.
Any other comments, amendments? Okay. Do we have enough to make a motion to accept the minutes?
Motion to accept the minutes?
For what date?
Oh, sorry, I don't even have it in front of me. What's the date?
October 12th.
Thank you. Motion to accept the minutes for October 12th, 2021.
I'll second that.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion on the minutes? All right, seeing no, we'll take a roll call vote. Dave,
Aye.
Ellen,
Aye.
Kate,
Aye.
Tom,
Aye.
and I vote aye as well. So the minutes are accepted. I think that's it, right, Abby?
Yes, I mean, just a reminder that there's some of those courses, those workshops, if anyone's interested, the Citizen Planner Training Collaborative ones. I've attended many of them over the years. They're very helpful because they're designed for board members, planning boards and zoning board members. So if you're interested, you can let us know and we can get you reimbursed. They're at very low, low cost. I think it was $20 per session.
All right. Thank you. Okay. I guess we're ready to adjourn. Take a motion to.
I move we adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor of Tom?
Aye.
I want to say all those in favor. I just can't though. Ellen,
Aye.
Kate,
Aye.
Dave,
Aye.
I vote aye as well. So we're adjourned. We'll see you on November the 9th, and please submit those locations to Abby as best you can describe.
Thank you.
All right, thanks. Good
everybody.
night.
Yeah.
Bye.